changing out there. There's a storm coming, Harry. Just like last time.
The Ministry of Magic is pleased to announce the appointment of Dolores Jane Umbridge as High Inquisitor to address the falling standards at Hogwarts School.
Things at Hogwarts are far worse than I feared. Enough! You have been told that a certain dark wizard is at large. This is a lie.
It's not a lie. I saw it.
We've got to be able to defend ourselves. And if Umbridge refuses to teach us how, we need someone who will.
Every great wizard in history has started out as nothing more than what we are now. If they can do it, why not us?
It's sort of exciting, isn't it? Stupefying! Breaking the rules.
Who are you and what have you done with Hermione Granger?
You're a really good teacher, Harry.
The Ministry's gonna have a full uprising on their hands. It's your turn now.
Discipline your mind.
We're in this together.
If Voldemort's building up an army, then I want to fight.
Look at me!
Yes, indeed, a little taste of, well, the trailer for Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, which was the 5th novel in the, well, classic Harry Potter series. And I bet when you read the books, and I bet when you watched the movies, you were thinking about wizards and magic and wands and spells. But did you think of Harry Potter as spy adventures? Did you think of Severus Snape as the ultimate double agent in all literature? Well, that's the thesis of a new book that came out this September called Harry Potter and the Art of Spying by co-writers Lynn Boughey and Peter Ernest. And I have Peter Ernest with me today, who's the executive director of the International Spy Museum. He's a 36-year veteran with the CIA, and if I told you what he did, you'd have to kill me, so we won't go too far into all that. But we are going to explore Harry Potter, the Art of Spying, with the man who helped co-write the book, Peter Ernest. So hello, Peter. Welcome to Dave White Presents.
Well, I'm delighted to be on your show, Wes. I know you and I met back in the mid-2000s on another venture, and I think I was on your show. And you actually came down and did a program at the International Spy Museum.
Well, actually, the show didn't exist when I came to the Spy Museum in 2003. You kindly introduced me for my first book, Spy Television, and then I came back 3 years later with my good friend Harvey Chertoff, and we did a program on The Impossible Spy. So, yes, that's right. We've met several times, and it's a real delight.
So you're certainly welcome to come back.
I plan on it. I mean, I think everybody, maybe we'll talk about the Spy Museum somewhere in here because anybody in D.C. should spend a day there because there's lots to see and do for children of all ages, even us old fogies, because it's a very educational and entertaining experience by miles, I think. So maybe we'll get to that a little bit later. But first, let's talk a bit about Harry Potter and the Art of Spying. And I gather this project really got started with your co-writer, Lynn Boughey, the spy novelist, or Boughey, I'm sorry. So tell us how Lynn started this and how he brought you into it.
Well, I think it would be very interesting to hear his account. But as he's an attorney who had a very, very long commute. He's out in Montana to get to his court cases. And in the course of the commute, he listened to the Harry Potter series and in the quiet of the car, traveling many, many hundreds of miles, he formed a very clear picture of the narrative. And he himself had done a spy novel, Mission to Shara, I believe it was. And so he had the sort of spying on his mind. He was also a member of the Association of Former Intelligence Officers, AFIO, and he thought there really is a lot of espionage and spying like tradecraft, as it's called, that runs all through the series. And so he began drafting what became this book, Harry Potter and the Art of Spying. Eventually, he got in touch with me in Washington and asked if I would be interested in collaborating with him. And I said, of course I would. It sounded absolutely fascinating because I thought Harry Potter is such an iconic figure, such a popular figure, that often those of us who've been in the business of intelligence and trying to make it understandable to the public, to help the public understand the intricacies of it, the difficulties of it, it's often very, very difficult. And I thought, wouldn't this be wonderful to use a figure like Harry Potter as a platform on which to explore the different kinds of intelligence? Certainly in this case, it's about what's called human intelligence, or human, because it's really about between individuals. I mean, you'll see some different kinds of tradecraft, but I think it's a wonderful way, and our hope is that this may be used in, let's say, universities as a way of introducing intelligence to people who grew up on Harry Potter. So we're optimistic in that regard.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense because in many ways it is kind of a textbook for people who want to learn about espionage because it goes back and forth. Well, the first half of it is very almost line-by-line analysis of the Order of the Phoenix and how these scenes relate to actual espionage. And then in the second half, they get into the whole series and talk about, well, why don't you share with the folks, how did you decide that Order of the Phoenix was the best example of spycraft in the series?
Well, because we thought that setting, in other words, where you had really an incipient a resistance organization, the Order of the Phoenix, that's not untypical of resistance organizations all through history. And the need for them to communicate, to do things in secret, to be able to train themselves and to carry out operations, if you want to put it that way, was very much the essence of intelligence work in that kind of a setting. Often, you know, that there are spies very much flourish at times of conflict. And here, of course, you have by the conflict. There is conflict in the Harry Potter series from the very outset. We know that. We come to understand that. But by the time we get to Book 5, and we learn about the Order of the Phoenix, the really conflict takes on a sort of a very a very organized form. And I think it makes it clear for the reader how to understand what they're doing, why they're doing it, and why that's considered spying or espionage.
Now, was it you who contributed all of the historical references and discussions of actual events that can be correlated to the Harry Potter books?
Oh, we both contributed. I think we put some of my actual operations in the book, in the sidebars. And, of course, there are a number of references to sources that J.K. Rowling drew on, like Shakespeare and Alice in Wonderland and so forth. She certainly had a rich number of sources that she drew on in putting this book together. It's extraordinary.
Now, had you read the Harry Potter books before Lynn came to you, or did that come about after he?
I was not quite. You know, there's a cadre of folks who got hooked on the Potter books from book one, and they were in line at the store for every one of the books when they came out. And they go by different names, Potterheads and so forth and so on. And they are a very dedicated group. And they really are very much into the novels. They have a very, very good understanding of what is going on. Often when you're dealing with them, their questions can be quite deep. So I didn't quite fall into that category. Harry Potter was of interest to me. It was interest on a couple of levels. One, it was catching on as a series, but it sort of took me back to my own childhood, because my father was an American diplomat in Manchester, England, where he met my mother, who was English, of Irish background, and then they were transferred to Edinburgh, where I was born. And so I grew up in a British atmosphere. So a lot of the sort of atmospherics of the book, the London and the train stations and so forth and so on, all that was very familiar to me, and it sort of was very to read it was in a sense to go home.
I was trying to think of some examples from the book to share with the listeners what they might find, and I guess the one that comes out most to me is you claim that Severus Snape is the best double agent in literature. Why?
Well, if you go through the books or you have seen the movies, as you know, Severus Snape comes across as I don't want to say a conflicted figure, but you wouldn't pick him out as a friend of Harry's. No, you just wouldn't. And it was only towards the end of the series is that we realize that Snape, who Harry, I think, thinks of as opposition, as an enemy, that Snape, in fact, was recruited by Dumbledore very early on to watch out for Harry. And in his way, he has, even though he has appeared to take the side of Voldemort. But in so doing, he is still loyal to Dumbledore. He is still loyal to, as you know, he has never forgotten the image of Harry's mother. And, in fact, I think his last lines were, "You have your mother's eyes." So it was very clear to us, if you sort of take it as a whole, where his true loyalties actually lay. It's a fascinating account, because that can happen. You can have in an organization someone who appears on one side of things, if you want to put it that way, but they really aren't. They're really they have another underlying loyalty.
Yeah, what parallels did you draw between Snape and actual cases?
Well, because there are a number of actual cases. I'm thinking of one who was there was an agent that the Germans had. It's a long story. Goes under the name of Garbo. This was a fellow who wanted very much to fight the Nazis, and he thought if he could get with the Germans, then he could work for the British against the Germans. And the Germans they didn't think he knew anything. They wouldn't accept his overtures. So, and he went to British, and the British wouldn't either. So he, on his own, he was not an educated person, began learning things about Britain, like train schedules. This is on the eve of World War II. So he began mastering some of the intricacies of British train schedules, so things of strategic interest, not necessarily highly classified. And then he went to the Germans, and they were fascinated, and they picked him up as an asset, as an agent, and ran him. And from there, he went back to the British and said, "Here I am working for the Germans, I'm their agent." So the British saw a chance for deception, and it became one of the great deception operations of World War II. Garbo eventually went to London, where British intelligence ran him against the Germans. And the Germans thought so highly of his intelligence. Now, mind you, the British were feeding him everything he gave the Germans, that he was awarded the Iron Cross at the end of the war. That's quite extraordinary. He gave the Germans very good intelligence, but it often was just a little late. And it was an extraordinary story. He created 23 imaginary subagents, and sort of kept their stories all straight. And he was part of the great deception that preceded D-Day to deceive the Germans as to where the Allies would be landing in June of 1944. So I relate that story simply because he appeared to be working for one side, but he was in fact working very loyally and very efficiently for the other side.
Now, you make parallels between these kinds of people and Severus Snape. I'm wondering if there are other examples in literature where you see spycraft that perhaps those who don't know a great deal about espionage also have elements of espionage. Can you think of anything?
Oh, sure they do. I mean, what makes up literature? Often it's conflict. Conflict between individuals, conflict between organizations, tribes, whatever. And whenever you have conflict and you have people engaged in conflict, then you sort of are made to order for there to be deception by one side or another, and one side or another to deliberately deceive the other side by recruiting people within the enemy tribe. I'm oversimplifying here, but you can only imagine, Wes, what sort of tradecraft back and forth is going on now in the Middle East with that extraordinarily convoluted situation.
So for readers of your book, they've really got to know their Harry Potter to start with, because otherwise it can be very confusing, right?
I think that the readers of the book, I think certainly if they've got a grounding in Harry Potter, either through the books or perhaps the movies, when they get to book 5, which is, our book is based on book 5, Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, and it takes really the first half or 2/3 of it directly from chapters in the Order of the Phoenix, and we discuss the narrative, and we point out the things that are spy-like, that are espionage-like. We also add, at the end of the book, we have a glossary, we have different discussions of deception and so forth, and in those chapters we draw on the whole book. But frankly, I think that would still make sense to any reader who's sort of gotten into Harry Potter.
Sure, or anybody who really wants to know about espionage, because when you said earlier about using it in the classroom, it really is kind of like a textbook where if you look at these examples. It is, but it's a way of what does it say, making the medicine go down. In other words, if you're a Harry Potter fan, it's a very I think enjoyable way to absorb sort of a whole new set of information about. It's a way of enabling you to look at Harry Potter from an angle that you hadn't thought of. Because Harry Potter is filled with deception, and I mean, it's a wonderful, wonderful coming-of-age book, and it's just brilliant in that regard. But also, as Hermione and Ron Weasley and they all mature, and they learn to deal with different things in the adult world, they have to deal with that kind of deception and duplicity that is in the real world. I also think it'd be the kind of book that after you've read it, it'll probably send you back to the Harry Potter books and read it because you got a different way of looking at it. I would hope that it would. I think people, it's 7 volumes, so it's a fairly lengthy series, but people come to love Harry Potter, and I think there are those who will go back and dip into the volumes, and of course the movies. Further, the movie series further popularized the novels. Well, before we run out of time, we ought to say a few words about the International Spy Museum. What's going on down there these days? Well, I know you were there several years ago. Since then, the museum is intact. We have taken one entire floor and are showing James Bond exhibits. And that display, that exhibit is called Exquisitely Evil, 50 Years of James Bond Villains.
So what we do is we look at the series, the James Bond series, through the eyes of some of his prominent, best-known, notorious, not prominent, notorious villains. And we're trying to show, on the one hand, how those villains often represented what some of the threats in the real world were and the things that we were concerned about. But then we also want to show the visitor how James Bond compares to real espionage. Because everybody's idea of espionage, if you ask anybody about spies, almost the first words out of their mouth are James Bond.
Yep.
And real espionage differs in many ways from some of the James Bond accounts. So we juxtapose the exhibits with videos of real case officers talking about the Bond films and giving some of their own experiences or so-called Bond moments. And that's pretty exciting. People enjoy it. We have over 100 artifacts from Eon Productions. We did this in cooperation with Eon Productions, which has put out the Bond series all along. And it's been very popular. The museum also has our hour-long simulation, Operation Spy, You Become the Spy. I don't know if you ever got to experience that.
No, this exhibit came after the last time that came along. But
And then we also
have grandson who's dying to come, so I guess we're going to have to.
Yeah, and then we have another exhibit. The weather's nice, called Spy in the City, where you go out in the vicinity of the Spy Museum, and you're involved in an espionage tale.
Always something to do, folks. And what we're going to do is at the Dave White Presents webpage, if you're not already there, you can go down to the Persons of Interest page. And this time around, I guess we'll put in two links. One for how you can get your copy of Harry Potter and the Art of Spying, and a link to the International Spy Museum, because they have all kinds of ongoing programs there. If you go down to see it, you'd need a day. It's not just one of these hit-and-miss museums where you can come in and spend an hour or two. You really need to plan a whole day, and definitely bring the kids, because the number of attractions and exhibits that are there is just... So I guess with that, you got the award-winning tour of Harry Potter, the Art of Spying, a little taste of the International Spy Museum, and especially the new James Bond exhibit. And so with that whirlwind tour, I guess I got to say thanks to Peter Ernest for joining us here on Dave White Presents.